While the other 30 teams have yet to start the season, the New Jersey Devils are already 2-0. Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils is here to talk about that and the outlook for the season next on the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, 2 games that already counted for the Devils over in Europe, 2 wins. What stood out most in your mind in these 2 victories?
I think what stood out the most from the New Jersey Devils was the depth assets really coming to play. So in game 1, the Devils came out victorious by a score of 4-1, and players that had big impacts were Stefan Noesen, Jonathan Kovacevic, Paul Cotter. Then in the very next game, they won 3-1. And once again, Paul Cotter, he had a good outing. Seamus Casey, he netted his first career goal, and it was on the power play, which was the Devils' first power play goal of the season. And Seamus Casey has been, I'd say, one of the biggest surprises for New Jersey because he had to earn his spot in Prague. He impressed during the preseason. He worked with pretty much nothing in his first outing against the Montreal Canadiens. And now look at him. He was given a Rolex at the end of the game because he was named the first star after game 2. So that's one way to kick off your NHL career. You get your first career NHL goal, and you also get a Rolex at the end of the Global Series.
Yeah, that's a nice bonus to get things started for sure. How about the goaltending? I mean, that was an issue last season for the Devils, and they give up only 2 goals in 2 games.
Well, let me tell you, Jacob Markstrom, he already is in contention for Save of the Year. You can book it. Game 1, he was phenomenal. And he only let 1 go past him, but that's okay. I care more about the win than I do the shutout. Jacob Markstrom, he looked really strong out there. Same could be said for Jake Allen. And honestly, the goal that Allen led up to Tage Thompson, I don't think that was really on him. And I think it was goalie interference, if I'm being completely honest. But nonetheless, both of them, Allen and Markstrom, were strong in between the pipes. That was also a need for New Jersey coming into this season. They needed stronger goaltending, and that's exactly what Fitzy did over the offseason, acquiring that sort of talent. And wherever Fitzy was inside O2 Arena, I'm sure he was smiling ear to ear because a lot of his offseason acquisitions have really panned out well so far. It's only game 2 of 82, so I'm trying to pace myself. It's still a very long season. The last time the Devils went 2-0 to begin their year was in 2021, and that season, 2021-2022 season, they did not make it to the playoffs. A lot can still happen, not trying to be negative about it, but I'm just saying it's still a very long season, but they're heading in the right direction.
How about the way the team played in front of the goalies? Because obviously when you're talking about goals against, it's not all on the guy between the pipes.
I'd say that the Devils, and Sheldon Keefe talked about it in his press conference, the Devils did a good job of suppressing the Sabres because I'd say Buffalo had a tough time establishing themselves in their offensive end. They got off to a better start in game 2, but it progressively got worse. And I think that's exactly what New Jersey did in terms of defense, which is you play physical, you just make it that much tougher for Buffalo to set up shop in their offensive end. And one of my biggest takeaways after game 1, physicality. And it's been a while since I've said it for this Devils team. I was very impressed with their forechecking. Let's look at an example. Stefan Noesen, he got the first goal of the season for the Devils. In fact, he got the first regular season goal in the entire NHL for this season. But how did he get it? He had an excellent forecheck, and then he maneuvered himself in front of the net. Nobody was on him. Kovacevic saw the open lane, dished it out to Nason, and he had a point-blank shot, and it was poetry in motion, picturesque. And here's the thing. I got to pat myself on the back just a little bit. I said I was rather impressed during preseason with Nason's outing. No one was really talking about it. I said, look, Nason is forechecking. He's being aggressive, and his net front presence is going to be big for New Jersey. Lo and behold, the first goal of the season for the Devils is courtesy of Nason, thanks to his forechecking, net front presence, and his stronger hockey IQ.
You mentioned Kovacevic a couple of times. He's played well in the first 2 games. You think the coach will learn his name soon?
Well, I'll be honest. I always say, in order to play hockey, you need a confusing last name that nobody knows how to pronounce. But in all honesty, I should thank the Montreal Canadiens for Jonathan Kovacevic. I should also thank them for Jake Allen, because I said Jonathan Kovacevic was a very underrated get for New Jersey, because he was actually quite good with the Canadiens. He led them in a lot of statistical categories. I know he was up there in defensive point shares rating. He led the team in plus minus. He had a decent amount of blocks, hits. I said Kovacevic, if he's given a chance to appear in a few games, he might surprise you. Yes, he's not Brett Pesce. Yes, he's not Brendan Dillon. But Jonathan Kovacevic was very underrated, and all he needs to do is replace the productivity of Kevin Ball, and he can do that. So I think Kovacevic is one of my players to look out for going the rest of the way. I was rather impressed in his Devils regular season debut.
How does the trip to Europe affect this team now that they have to come back and adjust to the time zone?
I mean, they're professionals. Here's the thing. That's inevitable throughout the rest of the year, because you might have to travel to Los Angeles, and that's on Pacific time. And then the very next day, you're going to have to go back to New Jersey, and you're 3 hours ahead. I mean, I've done a fair share of traveling. I'm sure you've done a fair share of traveling too, Gil. I don't think it's really going to affect them. It's way too early in the season. Now, as the season progresses, and I think this is the case for every team, fatigue and travel will catch up to you. It's inevitable. We're all human at the end of the day. But in all honesty, I don't think that's that big a deal. They don't have to play for another few days. They'll be fine.
Season now underway for the Devils. Who are some of the key players that will be the most important to the team's success this year?
I wrote an article for this for Pucks and Pitchforks, fan-sided. I guess everyone knows what to expect from Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Dougie Hamilton. Those guys are well-established NHL players. I guess you're asking me like someone that people might not really talk about. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go with Dawson Mercer. Mercer actually looked pretty good in the first game against the Sabres. He walked away with a point. He got an assist. The thing about Mercer is that he's coming off of a subpar season in which he posted a lot of career lows. And there was a huge contract dispute. In fact, we talked about it here on this platform a few weeks ago. I said, it's not a matter if, it's a matter of when will a deal get worked out. He held no arbitration rights. It was the end of his entry-level contract. It just came down to money. Mercer had no power in this case. And I'm just like, all right, he's got the contract, but here's the thing. He's got to perform. Because if he doesn't, the Devils, they need to focus on Luke Hughes' contract come the end of this season, and then Shimon Nemitz's contract at the end of next season. So Alexander Holtz is gone now. There's no longer a scapegoat for this Devils team in terms of who might see their name in trade discussions. But if Dawson Mercer does not get off to a decent start to the coaching staff's liking or the front office's liking, he's going to get that Alexander Holtz treatment, which is you're going to see your name in trade discussions every single week.
Yeah, and some players take that as a challenge, and some players have problems with it. We'll see if it even comes to that. Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find me on X or Twitter at TreyMatt4, and you can find the show's X page app at Locked On Devils, and you can watch or listen to Locked On Devils wherever you get your podcast from. Also available on YouTube, closing in on 2,500 subscribers right now. Hope to get that up as the season progresses.
All right, Trey, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you get to place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and this is a great time. Check out all the latest odds on FanDuel. You've got the baseball playoffs, college and pro football in full swing. Hockey gets underway this week, hockey fans, so check out all the hockey futures and the latest odds for your favorite team. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.